stakeholder event. I will just let you know that this meeting will be recorded and it will be put online. So if you don't want to be on video, then just you're welcome to turn your camera off. As I said before, I don't know if I said it when everybody was here, but if you could keep your lines on mute if you're not talking, that'd be really helpful because it just stops any feedback. If you do want to speak or have a question, use the chat button or the hands up and we will get to you when it's appropriate. Yep, so I'll introduce myself. Hiya. I'm Heather Clarkson and I'm the Walk Derbyshire lead. You've all been invited because you have showed an interest in this area of work and hopefully you will still feel that way by the end of this meeting. Scott's also here, if you can give us a wave, Scott. So Scott is our insight partner and he'll be introducing some Derbyshire Dales and other relevant data later, and then we'll have some discussion around that. If you could start using the chat to just put your name and where you're from, that would be really, really helpful. And I'll just, while you're doing that, I'll give you a quick overview of how it's going to run today. So we're going to start with a quick Mentimeter around, which is a bit of a survey, around why walking is important to you. And then you'll watch a little video, which is myself and a colleague talking about Walk Derbyshire and our systems approach. The reason it's a video is because we are doing these stakeholder events in 8 districts and boroughs across Derbyshire, all 8. So we wanted the message to be consistent. So we've done a video rather than me having to say it 8 times over. After the video, we'll go into a little bit of a breakout room for a discussion around systems approach in Derbyshire Dales. Then we will have a very short break, and then we'll go over to Scott to introduce some of your data and have a discussion around that. And then we'll talk about the next steps, and it's done. So before further ado, I can see people are putting things in the chat. Hi, Harry, who we can't see. There he is in the corner there. Right. If Adam, could you put the Mentimeter on? If people could start just filling this in, and Adam will be able to show the responses live as they come on screen. So why is walking important to you, either personally or in your work or both?
I can't see the meter thing. Oh, hold on.
I think there's a link in the chat that
oh, is there? Oh, I can't
Adam's,
see that either.
I think Adam's putting it in.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my mute. Yeah, I just pasted the link in the chat, so you should just be able to click that.
You are.
And then just answer the question, and you should see the answer on everyone's answer should come up on the screen. That's what I'm trying to say. Can you see that?
Hold on, I was just filling it in. No, actually, Adam, we've just got a blank screen.
Oh, have you? Oh.
Mm.
Let me try again. Sorry about that.
I think that technology is as cold as I am.
There we go. Yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah. There we go.
Wow. Thanks, Adam.
Everyone else is doing their bit. It's just me.
No, let's blame the IT. So we've got walking is accessible, free, and improves health and well-being. Good for my mind and soul. It provides most minutes for most people. Amazing form of exercise for all levels and abilities. Both, though more so in work, as I'm more of a mountain biker. Great for physical and mental health. Oh, sorry, why? For mind and fitness. That's an interesting one. Mental well-being, reconnecting with the outside space. It's the easiest and cheapest way for us to be active on a day-to-day basis. Yes, some really good responses there. So thank you very much. Just to let you know as well, so it has been recorded for the purpose of you being able to watch it again if you feel so inclined, and also to share it with any other people who weren't able to make it today who might be interested. So these will all be sent out to you afterwards. Thanks, Adam. Just going to show you my video about Walk Derbyshire and our system approach. It's quite a lot of information in around 8 minutes worth of space. So again, it is recorded, and we have actually got it on a separate video if anybody does want it. So don't worry if you don't actually manage to take everything in straight away. I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? Yeah. The vision of Walk Derbyshire is to make everyday walking the norm for all residents of Derbyshire, with a focus on our inactive population and our disadvantaged communities. We want to create a culture of walking with an emphasis around walking with our own communities and from our own doorsteps. We know that walking contributes to the vast majority of physical activity. It's available and accessible to everyone. There's an undaunting entry level, especially for those who are inactive. We know the physical and mental health benefits to walking. And when we talk about walking, we're talking about walking for both travel and for leisure. And we do know that walking is a cheap and clean way to travel. There are a number of elements to how Walk Derbyshire will be delivered. Insight and evaluation. Insight's important to ensure we're driven by our current knowledge and gaps in that knowledge and what walking levels look like across Derbyshire between our different demographics and geographies. Press Red have been commissioned to complete bespoke walking insight packs, which will be shared with you today with the aim to help guide conversations around how, where and who you can influence to walk more. Evaluation is important to capture and share learning on successes and things that could have gone better with a wider audience and to help us to iteratively change our approach to Walk Derbyshire. Leeds Beckett University are our Walk Derbyshire evaluation partners, and they'll be embedding themselves into our work. A PhD student will be recruited to start in February 2023, and their initial focus will be on Walk Derbyshire. Communication and engagement. We need to build relationships across all sectors and with the communities that we work with. And we need to recognise the importance of co-production in everything that we do. When it comes to workforce, we need to make sure we're supporting them. Our workforce includes those who directly engage with people about walking to those who could advocate walking as part of their wider work. These could be people who are either paid or in voluntary roles. So what do they need to be able to enable people to walk more, and how can we support them? As part of our work, Walk Derbyshire will invest across the county to enable us to evaluate and share learning around how we support our residents to walk more on an everyday basis. Chesterfield, Erewash, Bolsover and North East Derbyshire will have the opportunity to be active neighbourhood pilots. These are our 4 districts with the highest levels of inactivity and the highest levels of deprivation. And that will provide an opportunity for stakeholders to come together with their communities to agree on the best ways to invest funding on a place-based level to increase levels of walking. High Peak, Derbyshire Dales, South Derbyshire and Amber Valley will have the opportunity to be community engagement and co-production pilots. So that's working with the community to develop an understanding of the barriers and opportunities to support residents to walk more. Within our Walk Derbyshire pilots, there are some principles we aim to embed. They include tackling local inequality and working where the greatest need is. We need to ensure that targeted community engagement is embedded in co-creation, delivery and evaluation. We need to collaborate, share and learn across local priority places and share that learning across Derbyshire. We need to ensure that we're looking at a systems approach, considering the widest range of influences and interactions. We need to ensure our practice is inclusive and that all our opportunities are available to anyone. We need to make sure we're connecting communities and ensuring people can access appropriate local opportunities. And we want to embed the Walk Derbyshire vision at a local level. Today's session will help support the pilots, and moving on from this, each district and borough will look at developing a consortium who will develop their local bid and take the pilot work forward. The pilot work provides us with an opportunity for each district and borough to explore and develop a system approach to walking. I'm now going to hand over to James Cook, who will talk us through the complexities and benefits of a system approach to walking.
Walk Derbyshire aims to adopt a systems approach to walking. It's important for us to develop a shared understanding of what system working means to us. A system is a way of thinking about the bigger picture. Systems thinking is less concerned with how an individual, department or organisation operates, but more with how the connections, interactions and feedback between them help shape the outcomes we want to see. When considering the wider sectors that play a role in enabling people to move more, it includes partners such as health, community safety, voluntary community sector, business, highways, and many, many more. So why is taking a systems approach important for Walk Derbyshire? Physical inactivity, like many other social outcomes, is complex. By this, we mean there are a range of different factors that will impact upon whether a person is or isn't active. If we think about some of those different factors, for example, are there footpaths for people to walk on and what condition are they in? Are there main roads to cross? Are there planning applications around active travel and what do these include? And do people feel safe in their own communities? All of those different factors are interacting with each other in different ways at different times. And of course, when we talk with our communities to understand their lives, what's important to them, and what would enable them to walk more, we need to remember that each individual and family unit will experience those factors in different ways. As with all complex issues, there isn't a single intervention or solution. There's not one organisation or individual that has the answers. Change requires collective action from across sectors at all layers. We need to work collaboratively with our communities and with different partners and different sectors to understand those factors impacting on whether people choose to walk and what does that mean for our collective action. So how do we know that we are working in complexity? Well, some of what we do will be simple, some of it will be complicated, and some of it will be complex. For example, we know that something is simple if by taking an action, we know that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, if we switch a light switch on, we know that the light will come on. For something that is complicated, we know that if we take several actions, often expert steps, that it will achieve the desired outcome. For example, a mechanic will know that when fixing a car engine, that they need to take several steps, often in the right order, at the right time, to achieve that desired outcome. In terms of complexity, well, we know we are working in complexity when we do not know in advance if something will work. For example, just because something works in one community, it does not mean that it will work in another community, or even that it would work in that same community a year down the line. It is important to recognise and understand when we are working in complexity. The good news is that although we do not know in advance if something will work, we can plan for working in complexity. Key to this is setting up processes to enable us to learn quickly about what is working so that we can amplify it. And just as importantly, learn quickly about what doesn't work so that we can stop or adapt. As we've established around inactivity, we know that we are working in complexity. So we need to feel comfortable that the work is to explore, experiment, and learn together about how Walk Derbyshire can enable people to walk.
There we go. I always struggle to find my way back, but I am back, I think. So thanks for watching that. And also what we don't really mention in that little video is some of the wider outcomes. So that you've got all your environmental impact of people walking more, your health opportunities, your social impacts as well. So getting people to walk more is really important in all of our local communities and areas. Can I ask you to just using the Mentimeter again, just to put in this, and it will show us a little map this time, what system partner you represent, or you could be a resident or anything like that. This will be really helpful to look at this map, and then today's kind of the start of this journey, and then we'll see a few months down the line how many more people that we've got involved. It'd be interesting to see. So we've got public health, community organiser, community enterprise, local planning authority, a district council, community organiser, lovely, some really good community. 3, community organiser, community enterprise, keeps moving, add another one, community development. Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you very much. Adam, we are going to go into breakout rooms now. How many breakout rooms do we have?
So I think it's probably best to go with 2 rooms, one of 5 and one of 6, which would include both Scott and Will together.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout rooms to talk about what a systems approach looks like in Derbyshire Dales. We've got some conversation prompts, so don't panic about that quite broad question. The breakout rooms will be 15 minutes and there'll be a little countdown in the corner so you know when it's going to end. And then we'll all come back into the room and we'll do some feedback around what our groups talked about. So you will be transported into your breakout rooms as if by magic very shortly, and then you'll be transported back out again.
Okay, I've pressed it.
Thanks, Adam.
So you might get a little request to join. So just make sure you click it if you do.
Scott, can I ask you to feedback from your room?
I am here, yeah. I just want to check that I'm definitely here.
Yeah.
Okay, I can. I'm just trying to find my notes because I put them in Teams, and so I should have them somewhere, but I can't find them. I was room 2. I found them. Here we go. Right. So I had Will, Claire, Sam, Helen, and Katie. So we had a conversation firstly about well, just trying to get the conversation going about the approach and what we felt about it, and it, the view, will kind of reaffirm for us that it's trying to get this collective group of people that, just that diagram that went up on the screen just before we went into the room of how many people have got a vested interest in walking and walking behavior, and the relationships between all of them to try and make change was I guess a way of summarizing what Will kind of put into the room for us about trying to bring those partners together to learn to try and create this change. We then had quite a few list of people that weren't in the room. They might have been invited, they might have intended to be in the room, but just some observations that some, so representatives, people representing older residents. We've got Claire from the National Park Planning, but we haven't got anyone from the local authority planning side when we went into the group anyway. So there's certainly something there, and then connected to that is the gap around transport highways within the county council. We also talked about school sports partnerships, schools, ward leaders, parish councils. I heard a little conversation around. There's a lot of parish councils in the Dales. So actually, how do we bring them into the conversation? Because they are certainly consulted as part of planning processes, so we need to be thinking about that. There was then a couple of suggestions of kind of forums out there that might help us reach some of these groups. So there was a suggestion of a Derbyshire planners meeting that Claire can try and connect us into through a colleague if we need to, and that there is there was another one. What was the other network that was mentioned? Peak Park Parishes Forum. Have I got that right? Yeah, well, so there is another forum there that we can probably try and connect the work to as well. Then we got into, and I guess the barriers was probably a bit more partly towards the solutions side of things, but I think just recognizing the challenge that we've got with certain aspects of the walking environment in the Derbyshire Dales, which is around topography. It's uphill and down dale by its very definition in some parts. So it's going to limit, and it's going to really put a different spin on this whole kind of 20-minute kind of neighborhood model. that we might need to be thinking about what that kind of means. We then had a bit of a conversation, a few more bits came out then around other people, around community safety. I'm sure we saw a police officer in here earlier. I don't know who it was, but that's our first, isn't it, Heather? So that's a great start. And then we talked about a couple of organisations that had been invited in but weren't here, or they weren't here at the beginning, which were Rural Action Derby and Farming Life and the Farming Life Centre. So our conversation was mainly around kind of people that we'd like to be involved in the conversation, because they've all got a bit of a connection into helping us understand the walking environment, but also reaching probably some parts of the community that we've sensed we're going to need to reach.
That's brilliant.
I haven't missed anything, have I?
Wow. Thanks, Scott. We do have a link in with the planners. Actually, we were meant to go to them last month and the meeting was cancelled, so I think it's next week and somebody is going to that, so that would be really helpful, which it's not me because I'm at another stakeholder event, shock horror, but Stuart Batchelor will be going to that. So
Heather, so I think there's quite an important piece here, because I was quite blunt in the conversation with Claire, but and this is, I can be blunt with everybody now because we're all in a room together. If we really want this work to be the best it can be, it's how do we use our personal connections to try and bring some of these people into these spaces with us, because people don't always see the relevance of it to their work until somebody can maybe take a bit of time. And for Active Derbyshire, if they've never had any connection with Active Derbyshire historically, they're like, why are you coming and bothering me? But if it comes from somebody that they know, they kind of take the information in a slightly different way. So one of the things I'd urge us to think about is how do we capitalize on that? So Claire, if Stuart's going in there, help him. He might need it. So if there's anything we can just do to help Stuart kind of try and bring some of the other people into the process in the different districts, that'd be great.
And likewise, any other areas as well, isn't it, Scott? So anyone that you think would and should be here that you've got contacts with. And I know we talked about some of that in our room as well. So we talked about adult mental health group, other health colleagues and social prescribers, community connectors, people like that who weren't there, but many of the people in the room do have links with those people. So let's get talking to them and bringing them into these conversations. It's really helpful. We talked about fairly similar things to you, actually, Scott. We did say that the systems approach is to an extent understood in Derbyshire Dales, but there's lots going on and it's difficult to always know who's doing what and who to connect with. And there's can be a bit of a staff turnover problem where if you're working with one person, they're then gone and then that relationship's not built up, because we know that your relationship is really important part of it. We talked about linking up with other things that are going on already. So things like the Let's Chat benches. Somebody in the room, I think it was Simon who's left, is actually co-designing. Oh no, actually, I think it was Fiona's idea was to get residents design their own benches and take the ownership, things like that. So really talking about resident ownership and co-production. Some of the barriers we talked about were, again, like you said, Scott, the nature of the rurality of some of the areas in Derbyshire Dales. So the vision of Walk Derbyshire is about walking from your doorstep. So many of the people in the Dales can't actually walk from their doorstep. So what's our collective vision really in the Dales? If we can't say doorstep, what do we just say in our community? Are we all, singing from the same hymn sheet? We talked about test and learn approach. That was quite interesting. Fiona said, I'll quote, love the idea of it. Nothing's a failure. We all learn from it. So absolutely, I think that's something that we can all take from that. Yeah, I think that's probably everything. Have I missed anything? Becky, you're the only one I can see straight away. Have I missed anything? Nope. Fab. Fiona? I don't think so. Lovely. Okie doke. Thank you very much. So we're going to go into a 5-minute break. When I say 5 minutes, it's going to be 7 minutes because that rounds up better. So if we could all just turn our cameras and videos off and come back at 10 to, that'd be great. And that's when we'll go into our data conversation with Scott. Thank you very much. Always good to see people come back.
What are you saying about my presenting, Heather?
Oh, it was mine. Yours is next. I think we've probably, I know Will normally comes on with his face, doesn't he? So we'll just give him. I think we're probably. Stephen, are you here?
Yes, I am listening. Yeah.
Brilliant. Felt like I was on Ghostwatch then. Will, I think we've. Here he is. Fab. Thanks everyone for coming back from the break. Just before I introduce Scott and his data and insight, and Scott will be much better at. Hey, Scott, I'm not ready for you yet.
I've just realised I've jumped the gun.
You have. Just
Sorry.
before I introduce Scott, I'm going to ask you to do another Mentimeter. And if you didn't know what a Mentimeter was before this meeting, you will probably hope you never have to see one again. But just around, if you could talk about, I think Adam's going to put the link in. What are your expectations from this work? If you just put something in there, and then Scott can have a talk through and see how it relates to some of his the data that he's going to introduce.
Everyone access it? Okay. Yeah, cool. It's come through now. Start to panic then.
To see the onus on learning. I like that. And thinking about how we learn about improving access, creating new solutions, tackling rural isolation, collaboration. Yeah, that'd be great if we can find out how we can inform those planning policies about what needs to happen to help people walk more. It'd be wonderful. Thank you very much. There's any more for any more. This is your last 20 seconds. And then I will try and share my slide deck again and see if it works. Okay, shall we give this a whirl and see if I can get it to
And
work.
we'll just say when it goes on, if there is anybody who's, because in a couple of the meetings,
do a little test.
Yeah.
I think we might just need to do a test, Heather, first. The children are just on the way to gymnastics. If you can hear the noise in the background, that's what you can have a nice little insight into. Active lives. Are they walking? Right, here we go. Right, can you all see that?
Yeah.
Right, everybody's nodding, that's good. And if I go on one slide, has it changed?
Yeah. Brilliant.
Has it changed for everybody? Yeah, good. Okay, right, so over the next kind of 25 minutes or so, I'm going to just try and bring to life the data for Derbyshire Dales. It's in the main Derbyshire Dales. It's not quite all Derbyshire Dales because the sample falls apart for us for some groups, but I've got some stuff to supplement that, so hopefully it will help. I'm going to do a little bit about physical activity generally first, and just try and make the connection towards people being active and the contribution that walking makes, and then I'm going to get into a bit of depth around those that don't walk. What can we tell about those people that walk, and how do we classify a group of people like that? So, and then I'm going to then try and delve into community a little bit, into place a little bit, and then leave us with a bit of a summary. I've got one slide on children and young people as well. That's one of the data sets we've had to use at a Derbyshire level. So yeah, so it is for it's at a county level, but it is helpful, and the trends are pretty robust at that level. So it's usually it probably spread out everywhere. Right, let's just get into physical activity first. What you've got here is the 6 years. This is adults data, by the way, and what you've got here is, if you concentrate on the red line and the red dots at the bottom, that's the proportion of inactive people in the Derbyshire Dales for the 6 years of data that we've got. So it was 21.3 back in 2015-16. It's now 17.8, and you can just see it was dropping down before the pandemic. The pandemic lifted it up a little bit, and then it's dropped back down a little, back again. So it's bounced back to almost where it was pre-pandemic, which is positive, and is lower than it was at the baseline. The black line above that is a comparator to England, and not particularly relevant, because England, the demographics of England are quite different to the demographics of Derbyshire Dales. And then you've got the green light at the line at the top. That's the proportion of people that have achieved the Chief Medical Officer's recommendation of 150 minutes. The red line, by the way, is people that are doing less than 30 minutes a week. That's what inactive means. And then the top line is achieving 150 minutes a week. And you can just see how that's been meandering upwards, which is where the direction that we want it to be going in over the 6 years of data that we've got data for. What we've been challenged to do by Heather with this data set is to try and get underneath the skin of those that aren't walking. And the vision of Walk Derbyshire is for everybody to be able to walk every day, and from the doorstep as well, which we've already touched on, maybe a bit more of a challenge for the Dales. But this whole thing around regular walking is what we want to try and look at. So it's not as easy as you think to be able to tease this out of the active lives data set. That's where this data comes from. It's 500 adults on a rolling basis throughout the year in every local authority in the country, including Derbyshire Dales. And we get an enormous amount of walking data, but trying to organise it so we can look at frequencies, not as easy as we hoped it would be. But we have managed to come up with a model. So what we've done with this data is we've looked at how frequently people walk for 10 minutes or more. So if you aren't doing one session of 10-minute walking in the last 28 days a month, pretty much, then you're in that dark red bit at the bottom, around 23% of the population. So nearly 1 in 4 people in Derbyshire Dales. Then you've got a group above it, which is walking less regularly, which is doing between 2 and 1 in 7 sessions of 10 minutes or more in the last 28 days. Then you've got the group above that are doing between 8 and 27 sessions of 10 minutes or more in the last 28 days. And then you've got the dark green at the top, which is those that are doing 28 sessions of 10 minutes or more in the last over the month. Okay, that is as close as we can get to walking daily. Now, it might not be daily walking. Somebody could have done those 2 10-minute sessions or 5 10-minute sessions on one particular day. We can't tease that daily routine bit out from the data because the data is not collected like that. So we're using that 28 sessions in the last 28 days as a proxy as being pretty regular walkers. But then you've got this group at the bottom. By the way, it doesn't mean that they're not walking at all. They'd be doing some short walks, 5, 6, 7, 8-minute walks, but because it's not getting over that 10-minute threshold, we're not counting it. We're kind of looking at that just so that we can start to analyze the data of who's more likely to fall into this pattern of not doing a 10-minute walk or more. What we also need to be just conscious of is, answering this question of walking and physical activity. How important is it? Well, it's really important. So what you've got here is I'm putting those two kind of bits of information that I've just shown you around inactivity and activity together with our groups, the not walkers, the walking less regularly, the walking fairly regularly, and the walking regularly that I've just showed you on the last slide. So if we just start on the left of this slide, what you've got is you've got 67.4% of the people that are not walking. So of that 23% of people in the Derbyshire Dales that are not walking, 67% of them are inactive. So they're not getting over the 30-minute threshold in a week. Nearly 30% of people that are not walking are active. So they are getting their minutes from other activities, not walking, that's helping them to be physically active. Okay, so that'll be football, you know, all the sports out there, cycling, you know, all other physical activities. There's a group of our population in the Derbyshire, quite a big group as well. That's the biggest I've seen, by the way, 30% that just get their minutes in another way. Okay, look what happens though when people just start walking a little bit. 2 and 7 sessions in the last 28 days of 10 minutes or more, and look at how inactivity disappears. We get people walking a little bit a few times a month for 10 minutes or more. People get active. Okay, so this, and look at how those green towers really start to shoot up. So if people walk, people get active. So getting people into this habit of getting into a few sessions of walking is really quite impactful and helps us tackle not just walking behavior, but physical activity behavior as well. We've got, as I mentioned, you've seen a version of this, you know, what you've got, like with the inactivity data, we've got the data for walking for each of the 6 years. So all we've done here is take that model of not walking, walking less regularly, fairly regularly, and put it for each of the 6 years. And what's really positive here is you can see the trend. Look at how the not walking group as slowly, it almost follows the inactivity trend. It's dropping pre-pandemic up to 18, 19. The pandemic came along, pushed it back up. It's now dropped down again. The group that's walking regularly has just steadily grown like the active trend had. So we've got this situation where we've got 23%-ish in the latest year that are not walking, another 23% that are walking less regularly, but they're very likely to be getting their minutes in from a physical activity perspective, but in a different way. So we've been then trying to look at how we unpick, well, within that 22%, you know, who's more likely to be not walking within our local communities? What do we know about different demographic groups that make up that not walking? So what we've done here is we've taken the same model around inactive walkers, regular walkers, and the two groups between, and we've broken it down by different demographic groups. Just let me explain a couple of the demographic groups on here. NSSEC, what on earth does that mean? It is socioeconomic classification, okay? NSSEC 1 to 2 on the far right of the screen are higher socioeconomic groups. That are people that are accountants, lawyers, solicitor, what's the other professional occupation that I'm missing? Food doctors, as well as chief executives, directors. Series of questions asked by the census that puts people based on their qualifications, the level of income, the size of the organization that they are responsible for, etc., etc. 7 factors, I think it is, put together, puts us in socioeconomic groups. NSSEC 3 to 5, middle socioeconomic groups, and I'm pointing that group out for a reason, by the way. What is middle socioeconomic groups? Well, 3 is kind of middle management, 4 is self-employed and small business owners. I'm going to come back to that group a little bit later. And then 5 is kind of technical, skilled, and lower management level, lower supervisory roles. Okay, and then NSSEC 6 to 8 is routine work, semi-routine work, long-term unemployed. Okay, limited illness and disability, far left, highest levels of people, proportion of people that within that group that are not walking, up at 4 in 10 compared to 1.5 in 10 when you look at NSSEC 1 to 2, or compare it to no limiting illness. Look at the inequality that we've got between people with and without a limiting illness, where it's down at 16% of not walking when it comes to limiting illness, but it we're up at 42, nearly triple. So there is certainly some work to be done around those with long-term illness and conditions. So that point that somebody made earlier in my group around older people, well, older people are more likely to have long-term conditions. So it is certainly a group of connections to partners that we need to make. Then the interesting bit, it was certainly interesting for me when I started looking at this data, I was 16 to 34-year-olds, not really that into walking. They will be, when I mentioned that group that are finding minutes in another way earlier on in the presentation, a big part of that group is going to be 16 to 34-year-olds. They are more likely to play traditional sport. They're more likely to do fitness activities. They're more likely to ride their cycle, etc., etc. So they're more likely to participate in provision, and we start to come to walking as we age, as you can see, because look at some of our older age groups. Our 75-plussers are more likely to walk than our 16 to 34-year-olds, and then you can see how 55 to 74-year-olds in Derbyshire, one of our really strong walking groups. What's really interesting on this slide, two things. Some of these proportions of regular walkers, they're big. We haven't really seen any in that kind of 30% of the group that are regularly walking. This three middle socioeconomic groups are a really interesting group because we've got quite a high proportion of not walkers, quite a high proportion that are regularly walked, and the middle squeezed. And I will come back to that a little bit later. Really struck by the NSX 6 to 8. They are usually nowhere near the middle of this chart. They are normally down the left-hand side with some of the highest red towers. Now, the bottom red tower of not walking is quite small, but look at how big the middle bit is. So there is some room for improvement there. At a Derbyshire level, this is one of the groups that comes out at a county level as not walking as much as we would like them to. And we also know that that translates into higher levels of inactivity. We just need to be conscious with the Derbyshire Dales sample here, because the sample for that NSX 6 to 8 is really quite small. And on some of the other charts, which I wanted to try and do, we wanted to try and do for Derbyshire Dales, we've not been able to do because the sample falls apart a little bit, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. Just looking at the data for some of those groups over the years. So we're just looking at the pattern now for the 6 years of data for not walking for each of those demographic groups that we've just gone through. I just want to say something about ethnicity before I go into some of the other groups. We've got data for white British. You can see how it's reduced in Derbyshire Dales. Not walking is reduced. It's, you know, so things have got better, quite a degree better, which is really positive. We can't, the sample isn't big enough to do anything around our more diverse communities in the Derbyshire Dales. At a Derbyshire level, we know that it's our Asian and our Black communities where walking is, not walking is high. You know, so we have got a challenge around some of our diverse communities in terms of their views and the way that they look at walking and walking in their community and walking behaviour. Just to pick up on some of the, obviously that 16 to 34s is a really interesting one, because if you, I don't know if you just look at the pattern of most of those trends, they're generally going down, they're generally improving, which is great. The 16 to 34s isn't, it's gone up, dropped down a little bit, and drifting back up again. So there is something in there, particularly where that age group may overlay with lower socioeconomic status. So that NSX 6 to 8, you can see how that's dropped. The pandemic pushed it back up a bit, but it's bounced down in the latest year of data. But just bear in mind that we're playing with quite small sample here, so we just need to be a little bit cautious. NSX 3 to 5, you can just see how it's went down, and the pandemic has had quite an impact there that we need to be conscious of. Look at some of the older age groups though, and how low, not what, you know, and how good the trends have improved to some degrees, particularly for some of the older age groups, which is really interesting and really positive if we can maintain some of that. I'm going to come back to that NSX 3 to 5 a little bit later, just to build on the 16 to 34s a little bit. We can break this data down. We've aggregated the data here, so we've had to put all 6 years of data together for the Derbyshire Dales, gives us a sample of like 3,000. And then we can look at work status a little bit. Look at the student, how high not walking is amongst our student population. Really interesting. So and this might just be life course situation here, you know, and topography, etc., etc., etc. That's just having an impact here. we need to have a conversation as to whether it's a group that we're interested in. Again, I think my take would be where it comes in with another factor like maybe middle or lower socioeconomic groups, then where that overlays with younger adults, we might want to be thinking about our work there. And you can also see that amongst unemployed, even though that data compared to Derbyshire, that's quite good. But it's still high. We're still up at 1 in 3 within our unemployed parts of our community where where not walking is higher. So we just need to be thinking about that part of our community as well. This is a really striking slide. I'm going to get Martin to check this. I didn't get a chance to check the sample size of that most deprived quartile. So what we've done here, IMD, indices of multiple deprivation, it puts all of these small patches of the country into one of 10 groups. One group is the most deprived, 10 is the least deprived. Okay, we can't analyze the data at 10 by the 10 groups at a Derbyshire Dales level. What we can do is though put it into 4 groups. So what you've got on the left hand side is our most deprived quartile of communities, and then on the right hand side our least deprived quartile of communities. Okay, look at the difference in the not walking. It's doubled. So we've really got this interesting situation. But look at the robustness and the similarity of those that are regularly walking. So there's some people in our more deprived communities who are finding a way to walk, but others, quite big, that aren't. We really could do with understanding that and how we try and make sense of that, because some people are finding it, the ability, finding a way of walking regularly, even though they're living in the same community as others that can't. I will try and open that up a little bit later on and certainly give us a way that we might be able to explore it going forward. I am going to just do a little bit of a spotlight on lower socioeconomic communities, because that's one of the key groups that's come out at a county level. Some of this is Derbyshire Dales data, some of it is county data, just because of challenges with the sample size. The first thing that I want to just show you though is a breakdown. So we've aggregated all of the data to do this, and then we've broken the socioeconomic status down into smaller groups. Look at NSSEC 4. That really surprised me. This is a group, generally quite active. What I would say I've observed in the data in other parts of the country when it comes to inactivity is this group, self-employed and people that are small employers, have had a tough time from the pandemic, and it's pushed that inactivity levels up in some parts of the country quite high amongst this group. And I found that really intriguing. And I don't know why, and I'm trying to understand why, whether it's changing in working hours, all of that's happened because of the pandemic, but it's certainly something for us to think about, especially as when you look across socioeconomic status, it's the highest proportion of not walking. So it's something, where is those groups in our community? Where can we find them? Is something you could probably use other data to try and identify where those parts of our community are more prominent. And then you've got some quite higher levels compared to the higher socioeconomic groups of not walking within our NSSEC 5, 6, 7 and 8. However, look at the size of the regular walkers for long-term unemployed. The sample's all right for this group. It's not brilliant, but it's not bad. But that's just strikingly different to what we've seen anywhere else. So it's probably sample related, because this is a group that usually has a very big red chunk at the bottom. And it is big if you compare it to some of the higher socioeconomic groups, but that was really quite surprising. So keep that in our mind. Keep that NSSEC 4 group in your mind, because we certainly need to be thinking about that in our discussions later and in future workshops. When it comes to NSSEC 6 to 8, so this is data now just for lower socioeconomic groups, so that NSSEC 6 to 8. And we've broken it down by a second demographic factor. So this is men within lower socioeconomic groups have got higher rates of not walking compared to women. So the overarching two red blocks for women is higher, but the not walking group, so lower socioeconomic men, are less likely to do 10-minute walks than lower socioeconomic women. So there is something, and we're seeing that pattern quite consistently across communities. why are we seeing that? Is it type of work? Is it where people go to work? Is it the way that people get to work? What's making, what's creating that difference? I'm really intrigued by that, because it is something that we're seeing quite a lot. Then you've got our 16 to 34-year-olds. We know that our 16 to 34-year-olds across socioeconomic status have got a higher proportion of not walking, and it's up to 1 in 3 when we look at it within our lower socioeconomic communities. So this is 2 groups that and then limiting illness. You can see how those red towers are all quite high. And then if you remember that I pointed out the 55 to 74-year-olds earlier on, and the trend was really positive and was dropping quite low in terms of not walking. Well, when we aggregate all of the data for lower socioeconomic groups, it ain't that low. So we've got some challenges within the lower socioeconomic community that we need to be thinking about, but it's not as easy as saying it's everyone in that part of our community. So we need to be thinking about how we might get a bit more nuanced around that in terms of our engagement and how we reach people. The point about the school run, Claire, is a really great point. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I wanted to dive into this and show you some more Derbyshire Dales data, but the data falls apart, so we can't do it. So I'm going to show you the same kind of pattern, because we've seen it everywhere and it's happening at a county. So let me just explain this. It takes a little bit of time. I'm going to go into a bit of detail about this, and then I'm going to go into some community kind of area-based stuff, and then I'm going to bring us out to a little bit about how the environment is important, even though we've got all of the topography challenges that we've got in the Derbyshire Dales. What on earth are you looking at? Right, what we've done here is we've split walking for leisure and walking for travel. Walking for leisure are the light blue towers. Walking for travel are the dark blue towers. Let's start in 2015-16. In 2015-16, lower socioeconomic communities in Derbyshire, remember this is the county, we're on average doing 7 sessions of walking for leisure and 6 sessions of walking for travel. Okay, and the depth of the block equates to the length of the session. So if the block's getting thinner, then the length of the session is getting shorter. If the block's getting thicker, the length of session on average is getting longer. Now look what happened when the pandemic came along. The pandemic pushed up the number of walking for leisure sessions. It's gone up to 8 again, which it was in 16-17, but the blocks have got bigger. So we've started to walk more for leisure and do longer sessions. Look at what's happened to the walking for travel sessions. It's dropped and it's stayed down. And it'll be interesting to see whether it bounces back, which is a point that I will come back to a little bit later. To show you this in another way, look at what's happened to minutes from walking for leisure and walking for travel. Okay, remember this is adults. Look at how the minutes in Derbyshire had gone up a little bit, stayed up, and then when the pandemic came along, boom, walking for leisure minutes gone up again. Okay, now look at what's happened to walking for travel minutes. So imagine all of the minutes from walking for leisure and walking for travel all put together into, and then they're shrinking for walking for travel, and it's growing for walking for leisure. So we've got this situation where the pandemic has come along and it's shifted maybe our motivations for walking. There's a lot of things that happened in that pandemic that made us think differently about how we go about things. And when I first saw this data, I thought work patterns. Okay, and I thought it's got to be working patterns. I've seen some other data and it's a bit more than working patterns, which is the interesting bit, or I'm safe in my assumption that I think I'm quite safe in my assumption that it's a bit more than work patterns. I'm going to come back to that in a minute or two, though. I want to just take us a little bit more into community first. You can get this data from Sport England, really helpful data. They haven't published it lately, but it is coming. We're going to get some new data next year where they've modelled the inactive and active data down to what we call middle super output area. What on earth does that mean? It's basically an area that has between 5,000 and 15,000 people living in it. Okay, and what you've got here is you've got inactivity mapped by each of these middle super output areas, and in the Derbyshire Dales they're all blue and inactivity is all pretty low. Okay, that doesn't show us the full picture, does it? We know that that's hiding some inequalities. So we found another way of looking at the inequalities and helping us to get lower. But you're just going to have to stick with me a little minute. It gets a bit geeky. Okay, when the Office of National Statistics does the census, it puts all of us into one of 75 little groups called output area classification groups. And this little group is a group of people that share similar demographic factors. So it will say things like more likely to be Asian, more likely to live in detached housing, more likely to have 1 or 2 dependent children, more likely or less likely to own a car. It'll say things like this to describe each of these 75 little subgroups. Those 75 little subgroups add up to 25 groups, and the 25 groups add up to 8 supergroups. What you've got on your screen now is data for 5 of those 8 supergroups for Derbyshire Dales. We can aggregate the data and we can analyze it by the supergroup level, the 8, and we can analyze it by the 25 group level, but we can only do that at a county level because we need a bigger sample to be able to do it, obviously, because we're breaking it down into lots of little groups. So we've got the data at a county level. This is the data specifically for Derbyshire Dales for 5 of the 8 supergroups. Look at the difference that we've got here. And the reason why I'm showing you this is we can follow these groups down into communities. So just remember that name, horrible names of people, by the way. They're not groups that we've written, but just follow this: constrained city dwellers, hard pressed living, suburbanites are 3 groups that have got higher levels of not walking. Now, those 3 groups can be mapped down to street level using some free-to-use mapping tools out there around output area classification. Remember the names of the group: constrained city dwellers, this blue patch in here, very likely to not be walking. Hard-pressed living, the yellow patches. Okay, suburbanites, the purple patches. So this is Ashbourne. This is showing us where these groups live, and we've got the data to tell us whether they're likely to be not walking in the Derbyshire Dales. We can get even if we use the county data, we can get into even more minutiae because it'll break down into 25 different groups, and that purple will change into shades of different purple, and the description of each of those groups gets richer and richer. So we can start to see where our communities live that are not walking. And then we need to be asking ourselves, just go back to the kind of threads that I've been putting in here. So we've got this situation where across the Derbyshire Dales, walking's pretty, strong, and it contributes a lot of minutes, but we've got some people that don't in our community that are not experiencing it as much as others. Where do they live? Well, we can start to identify where some of the communities that those groups live in, and then we've got this whole thing about, well, what's the environment like, and what is it? Why are we seeing this shift in walking for leisure and walking for travel? Well, one of the reasons why we need to be putting into our thinking, and I'm really intrigued that it came up earlier in the conversation about 20-minute neighbourhoods. I've pinched this from Greater Manchester, by the way. We haven't got this data for Derbyshire, but some of it will stand, I think. But it'd be great to be able to get some learning like this for Derbyshire. What this shows is from some data collection that Greater Manchester did just before the pandemic, December 2019, is where people that do walk, where do they walk to? Now, in my head, that whole walking for travel thing was, well, people walking to work. Look how far down the list walking to work is. Look how some of these other places are that people walk to: escorting children to primary school, places of worship, GP pharmacy, job centre, banking, taking kids to secondary school, seeing family and friends, food shopping, etc., non-food shopping. Okay, I was just blown away, but when I saw this, that green, look how important our connections to green spaces as are for people to go out and get a walk. Now that's something that we can do really well in the Dales for most communities, I would have thought. So what does that look like through the eyes of some of the groups that we know are not getting 10-minute walks in? How can we start to better understand that in some of our engagement? But the bit that struck me the most about this slide when I saw it, and it is only an assumption, but it's something certainly for us all to be thinking about, is how many of those things that people are more likely to have gone online because of the pandemic. Okay, GPs gone online, job centre gone online, food shopping gone online, banks gone online. You know, who's more likely to be comfortable doing those services online? Younger adults. Where is some of our higher levels of not walking? Younger adults. You know, we've got this really interesting situation going on, if these assumptions are sound, which we certainly need to test, which is what are people going to come back to walk to? You know, what in our community is important to us now that we want to connect to on our feet because it's easy. By the way, they've also got another slide. I just didn't have time to put it in because I'd be whittering on for hours. Is the average time it takes to walk to each of these destinations, and they're all of them, apart from the attending university college, which is the average time was about 18 minutes. All the rest of them are under 15 minutes. So that connectivity, quick connectivity to places is really important. But some of these services might not be as relevant in the future to walk to them because we're comfortable with doing that, accessing them online. And we need to be thinking about that. We need to be putting that into our mix and thinking about how can we learn about this. Just very quickly, one slide on children and young people. Again, this is at a Derbyshire level. The sample size for the children and young people active lives just isn't big enough at a local authority. So we've done some work at a Derbyshire level. There's in the pack that we'll share afterwards. There's a few more slides, but I'm just going to present one and I'll tell you what's on the other slides as we do it. So it's a little bit different for children and young people in the way that the data collects. They also meant to do a lot more minutes. They're meant to try and do an average of an hour a day. And so the whole active kind of definition looks quite different. What you've got here is the proportion of children and young people that have done walked once a week. Look at how the pandemic shifted it. Pandemic came along, boom, look at how those towers have jumped up. Okay, what's really fascinating is the groups that have driven that increase. It's come not completely, but from girls and from low family affluence children, okay, who have, because of the pandemic, found themselves walking more. There is a pack that Heather can circulate that we've done around teenage girls. Teenage girls currently are experiencing increasing levels of activity. And we know it's being driven by walking. So what is it about walking and teenage girls that we might be able to learn about? And how does that help us see some of our other work? Because there's something really positive going on amongst teenage girls and walking that we can really do with bottling up and trying to think about how it applies to other parts of our community, because it's a real positive. There's some headlines just been published around the latest data for the children and young people. The headline data has been published just last week. That increase in activity levels amongst teenage girls, it's gone up again. We don't know whether it's walking that's increased again, but activity levels have gone up again. So the trend continues, which is a real positive. And we will in time tell you whether it's really how much it relates to walking. But there's some stuff there for us to try and unpick and think about. Finally, that's my key messages, really. That I've covered all of these as I've gone through the slides. There's certainly something to be thinking about that younger age group, particularly we're now lower socioeconomic communities. There's certainly something to be thinking about NSEC 4 and 5 as well. So it's bringing us out of that kind of lower socioeconomic kind of space a little bit. And, you know, what is it that through our engagement, what is it that we want to try and hear, learn, understand, for then how it starts to shape some of the decision and the thinking that we do going forward. I'm done, Heather. I've waited on too long, probably. Usually do. Is there any questions? Is there any thoughts? Is there anything in the chat that I need to answer?
There's one from Fiona in the chat about what is hard pressed living.
Oh, I know. They're horrible groups, the names for people, aren't they? So I can't tell you anything more, Fee, apart from it. the statos that do this have come up with some names for groups of people, and that's one of the
Yeah,
groups
there's
that
some real oddballs in there, isn't there?
Yeah,
So I
there
was
is.
just trying to think what hard press living is.
Well, what I would when you look at some of them, so that you can get this document called Pen Portraits, and it describes all of the 75 little groups, and then the 25 groups, and the 8 super groups. What I would say about, there you go, Sam's just put it in the chat. What I would say is that their people on lower incomes is a significant driver here. They're more likely to be in routine, semi-routine work, that kind of stuff. Some of the subgroup definitions are even worse. You know, you look at them and you cringe at how badly they are written, but outside of my control, that one, I'm afraid. There is actually, Heather, is it worth us? We can circulate the pen portrait. Oh, there you go. Brilliant, Sam. There we go. It's done. As easy as that, because it is helpful if you, especially if you're geeky. You know, you'll have a read of that and you'll get, oh, that's quite interesting. But you do need to be a bit geeky to read it, if I'm honest. Is there any other questions? Any other thoughts? Have I missed anything?
I guess it's worth exploring, Scott, whether whether what we've just heard is something that was expected for this area, or is it breaking news or anything like that?
Ellen,
Oh.
You're on mute.
I've seen some of your numbers before, Scott, and I always find them absolutely fascinating. So it isn't stuff that is blowing my mind, though it was the first time I saw it, as in a couple of years ago or whenever it was. The stuff we've got sort of adds to it. Is that we just saw some numbers the other day. I mean, they're just stuff that's around all the time. That 80% of our residents live in a rural village. Okay, so yeah, you can show me a picture of Ashbourne and you can say, yeah, there's that blue bit in the middle and they're city dwellers and all that. But actually 80% of our people don't live. And I don't even know that you talk, like, where do these, I always worry where these numbers come from. Do they actually go and do they talk to all the farmers and the people in the little hamlets? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes me feel better.
So to give you a sense of it, on this slide, the most robust tower on this slide is the rural residence tower, and the sample from the rural residents is huge.
Okay.
So and now
that's because 80% of our people are.
Of course it is. Yeah. So it should reflect it.
But that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that side of things. Now we can't identify in the data where an individual's response comes from. That's protected. So we can only look at it at higher levels. So that's why we've done the analysis using this. But we can be pretty confident that those rural residents will be on the edges of towns and in rural villages. And the sample is a random, you know, it's a very well orchestrated random sample. And they stick to some rules that drive me mad, but I can understand why they stick to them. So we will be getting that sample from rural villages and communities. So where the sample falls apart a little bit is around diverse communities, and diversity is one of our challenges. Lower socioeconomic is also a challenge. That is another group that just don't respond to the methodology that they currently use. We still get, you get a double whammy in the Derbyshire Dales, because that part of our community is a smaller part of the community. It's about 24%, something like that off the top of my head, compared to about 30% nationally. So when you've got a smaller proportion, and then, you know, the less likelihood to respond to the methodology, then you get this double whammy that the sample's small, and that is an issue. But at a county level, it's pretty robust.
Cool, thank you.
And I think it's worth saying, Scott, on that slide that Helen's just referenced that showed Ashbourne, we will send the slide pack out, but there's an interactive link. So the bit that shows Ashbourne is a screenshot of Ashbourne, but there's a link there where it says here, and you can go to all the places in
Will
the different areas.
Will and Heather mentioned to me just before the call actually about the rurality side of things. So I was having a little rummage around. So that source at the bottom, or if you put it, there's a link behind where it says here, there's a link behind that you can get onto this mapping tool. It's a free to access mapping tool. So you can look at all the parts of Derbyshire Dales then. And what I was intrigued with was some of the villages where it's not just rural residents. So you get some of the hard pressed living, for example, and some of the suburbanites in some of the smaller villages. So that would be quite an interesting and dynamic where you start to see some of the colours where we know not walking is as it should be. What does that look like in some of the smaller places? We just picked Ashbourne by random choice of my colleague Martin going, let's do Ashbourne, for no other reason beyond that. Is the 2021 data due soon? Is that the census data, Claire? Is that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of it is already coming out, okay, but we're not using it just yet because it's not, what's the word, the word that they're using now, so they've gone from using rounded figures up to the nearest 100 or nearest 1,000 to using the word provisional. So we end up doing a load of work and then some more data comes out and it's been updated and we end up having to do all the work again. But this modeling, it's probably a couple of years away. 12, because it'll be one of the last things that they do. They'll do all of the releases of, ethnicities come out in the last couple of weeks. You might have seen the headlines around faith and around how Christian faith is no longer the majority of the population. It made the headlines last week. So some of those bits of information are coming out. We haven't got any new data on lower socioeconomic status yet. We haven't got any new data on limited illness or disability yet. We have got some ethnicity data that's been published just this last week. However, that is one of the data sets that's provisional. So we were a bit reluctant to use it until we're confirmed it's not going to change. There are some useful tools out there that you can, that the ONS have published, where you can explore the emerging data as they publish it, and they're really useful. One's a mapping tool, so you can see it all mapped, but it's just the latest data. There is then another tool where you can get a comparison between 2011 and 2021. So if you want, I can circulate. I'll try and find the links to them and I'll put them in the chat.
Thanks, Scott. And I think it's probably worth mentioning, I know Helen's just said that there's, you've seen some data recently, there's 80% of residents living in a rural village in Derbyshire Dales. And then there'll be other Derbyshire Dales specific data and information that you, as people who work there and live there, will know about as well, that won't necessarily come out through this stuff that Scott's doing. So I know Sam sent through before the Age UK loneliness data, and there's this free school meal data. So all that sort of stuff that we need to be looking at to either match what this data is telling us, or fill some gaps, or give us even more rich picture of what our communities look like in Derbyshire Dales and why we need to really focus our efforts to get those people who are inactive walking more. So if there is any local data that I've not just mentioned, so those two things that you would like to send through, feel free to send them through to me. That'd be really helpful, or put them in the chat. Go on, Will.
Oh, can I just add one thing, Heather, before and any engagement information, if you know, there's a number of community partners in the room. If there's any, and it came out in our conversation earlier, Claire, didn't it, about your hearing from residents that they want to be connected to the walking routes, and so, you know, that kind of intel would be really helpful, especially if we know if it's come from certain parts of our community. That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, Becky gave a similar example as well, where there's community engagement. So yeah, anything like that is really helpful. Will, do you want to come in?
Scott stole my thing. That's what I was going to say, Scott. I know we've done recently, Fee and Katie, is Kate still on? There's been the healthy living, wellbeing events. I wonder whether there's any sort of engagement that's come through them as well, in terms of residents' thoughts around walking or activity or whatever. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But yeah, any of those engagement events.
I don't think we asked any specific questions, but Katie and myself are lucky enough to be planning a spring festival. So again, maybe this group or whoever might want to think about, maybe that's something you would like to do, to chat to a few people. So the offer's there.
That could be a bit of a driver for that next event potentially, I suppose, could it?
So yeah, thanks, Will. Any further questions about the data and insight or anything local? No. I'll move on to the next steps. So the next steps really are there'll be a face-to-face stakeholder event which will be facilitated by somebody who's good at facilitating, so not me. And that's going to be on Tuesday, the 24th of January, and it's at Bakewell Agricultural Centre. If I'll share, in fact, I think I've got a copy of the link here. So if I can share the link here to get to it, I'll put it in the chat. If you could book onto that event, that'd be really helpful. And also talk to your colleagues and talk to the people that we've mentioned that are missing today and try and get them down there. There will be a capacity issue because we can't seat 100 people, but if you book on, and then we can make sure that we've got a really good rich amount of people there, different people with different perspectives, different community angles and things like that. So at that event we'll be talking about what we've heard today, this data, where does it take us, where do we think that we need to focus our efforts, and who do we need to be talking to, and then where do we go from there is the purpose of that one. I don't know, Adam, I'll find the link. Adam, are you able to put a Mentimeter up? So this is the final Mentimeter of the day, you'll be pleased to know, which is where you feel that you fit into this work, having been involved in today's session. And I'll find the link to the stakeholder event as well.
I've just got the next event link, so I'll just put that
in. Fab, thanks, Adam.
There's the Mentimeter link.
Be interesting to see if anything's changed from the beginning or if anything changes as we move forward. So we've got listening to data and information and come up with ideas. Helping organisations to connect into this work and understand what is relevant to them and their work. Yeah, that's probably one of the more important things that we've really reflected on following some of these sessions, is that we really do need to make those connections a bit stronger. Supporting with contacts and influencing others. I definitely feel more involved and can see that joining up will be useful. Lovely. Driving forward using the relevant data that we've seen today. And any other data that we might know of as well. It's important. Brilliant. Got 5 in there, I think. Don't know if any more's come in. That's brilliant. So I'll really leave you with a request, really, which is to champion and cheerlead this work around your own connections and around Derbyshire Dales. Talk to people, talk to residents, see how we can get them involved, and try to get as many people as possible to this face-to-face event on the 24th. And if they can't make it, then just involve them in conversations aside from that anyway, because that's equally as important as has been involved in the big conversations. Go on, Scott.
My brain's working overload now. I'm really intrigued by Helen's comment and this whole rurality space, and I do think if someone can have a look at, or if you need us to, we could have, whether there's 2 or 3 villages out there that have got a bit of a mixed demographic and not just rural residents that you could start to think about looking at in a quite interesting way. Going back to the conversations that we had earlier, maybe no footpaths and no infrastructure there to be able to encourage you to be doing any walking for travel sessions. You know, that whole kind of space bit would be quite an interesting bit, I think, for the Dales to be. I'd certainly have that in the mix in your heads when you go into that conversation in January. I think it's a really interesting angle on this. And there's probably only yourselves and the High Peak that could probably go down that route because of the unique nature of your topography. So there is certainly something in that space, but you need to pick the place quite carefully, I think, or the places quite carefully. That would be just my final musing for what it's worth. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Oh yeah, if anybody does want to have a look into that, and I'm happy to work with you between now and the 24th of January to have a look, Helen Brill, and maybe we'll get a couple of interested parties and see what we come up with from that as well, and bring that into the mix. That'd be really good. Fab. I want to thank you all very much for coming today. I know this is one of the later meetings that we have, so it's really nice that everybody's stayed till the end. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Keep shouting about it. Adam is going to put a little link to a feedback survey in the chat. It'd be really helpful if you could just fill it in. Any sort of feedback at all is really helpful for us moving forward for any other events that we do and how we shape some of the work as well. So yeah, just again, thank you very much and keep championing it and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you,
Bye-bye.
Fee.
Bye.